Have you ever sat among your own flesh and blood, listening to them toast to your 32nd birthday, yet felt a freezing chill run down your spine? I have. That was the exact moment I realized the cruelest betrayal comes not from a faceless enemy, but from the very person smiling and cutting your cake. Brace yourself. What I am about to tell you will strip away the illusion of family love until the final mask drops. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. I want to thank you sincerely for your continued support, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep bringing these tales to life. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you will find exclusive, true stories that are much longer, deeply detailed, and feature multiple emotional voice actors bringing the drama to life in ways we cannot share publicly here. You can join our community by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link down in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us begin today's story and step into the chilling world of Haley Fernandez. The crystal chandeliers of the upscale Austin, Texas restaurant cast a warm golden glow over the private dining room, masking the suffocating coldness I felt in my chest. It was my 32nd birthday. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the absolute picture of the modern, successful American family. There were clinking glasses, expensive bottles of imported wine, and polite bursts of laughter echoing over the soft jazz playing in the background. But I knew better. I had spent my entire life learning to read the microscopic cracks in this perfect porcelain facade. At the head of the table sat my mother, Isabella. She wore her usual immaculate silk dress, her neck adorned with heavy pearls, and a carefully practiced smile that never quite reached her piercing dark eyes. She was the grand conductor of our lives, orchestrating every conversation, dictating every career choice, and ensuring the family image remained utterly pristine. She demanded perfection, but only from me. Next to her was my father, Diego. He was physically present but spiritually vacant, a silent shadow of a man who had long ago surrendered his voice to keep the peace. He spent the evening nodding along, swirling the dark red liquid in his glass, purposely avoiding eye contact with any of us. And then there was Mateo, my younger brother, the golden boy. Mateo sat across from me, picking at his sea bass with the bored arrogance of someone who had never faced a single consequence in his 26 years of existence. Whatever Mateo wanted, Mateo received. If he failed a college course, it was the professor's fault. If he wrecked a luxury car, the checkbook was immediately brought out to make the problem disappear. I sat quietly, playing the role of the grateful daughter. I smiled when expected and thanked them for the lavish dinner I knew I would ultimately end up paying for. The air in the room felt impossibly heavy, thick with unspoken resentments and hidden agendas. I watched my mother lean across the crisp white tablecloth. Her movements were always calculated, never spontaneous. Under the guise of a loving motherly gesture, she reached out to straighten Mateo's collar. She pulled him close, her manicured nails resting against his shoulder. The jazz band hit a soft crescendo, but my hearing had always been unnervingly sharp when it came to her. I caught the briefest flicker of urgency in her eyes before she whispered into his ear, "While everyone is here, go and change the drive." She said it so smoothly, burying the command underneath a beaming smile directed right at me. A split second later, Mateo stood up. He casually tossed his linen napkin onto his chair, announced to the table that he needed to take an urgent business call, and walked out of the private room. Neither my mother nor my father batted an eye. No one asked questions. No one found it rude that he was abandoning his sister's birthday dinner before the cake had even arrived. As the heavy oak door closed behind him, a gnawing, visceral anxiety began to claw at the edges of my stomach. The puzzle pieces rapidly clicked together in my mind. The sudden insistence on hosting this dinner tonight, the way my mother had made sure I drove here with her and my father, explicitly demanding I leave my own car locked away at my apartment. My privacy was not just being invaded, It was being meticulously dismantled while I sat trapped behind a plate of expensive food. I forced myself to maintain a serene expression, swallowing down the bitter taste of betrayal that threatened to choke me. I engaged in hollow small talk with my father about the Texas weather, counting the minutes as they painfully ticked by. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my face remained a mask of polite indifference. Exactly 1 hour later, the oak door creaked open. Mateo stepped back into the dining room, but the arrogant swagger he had left with was entirely gone. His face was the color of wet ash. Sweat beaded along his hairline, and his hands were visibly shaking as he aggressively shoved his phone deep into his pocket. He sat down heavily, staring blankly at his empty plate, his breathing shallow and erratic. I watched from my peripheral vision as he darted a panicked, secretive glance toward our mother. He gave her a subtle, frantic shake of his head. Whatever they had planned, whatever violation they had orchestrated in the dark, had just gone disastrously wrong. My mother's flawless smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A sharp glint of absolute panic flashed across her face before she quickly masked it with a bright, overly loud laugh at something my father had not even said. I did not react. I simply picked up my crystal glass, the cool surface grounding my racing thoughts, and took a slow, deliberate sip of my Cabernet. The rich wine slid down my throat as I looked at the two people who shared my blood. I knew right then that the illusion of our family was dead. The biggest storm of my life had officially begun, and I was exactly where I needed to be to watch them drown in it. The drive back to my apartment felt like navigating through a suffocating, lightless tunnel. I had excused myself from the restaurant shortly after the dessert plates were cleared. Citing a sudden and blinding migraine, my mother had offered her usual fake sympathy, but her eyes were darting nervously toward my brother. I barely acknowledged them as I walked out into the humid Texas night and hailed a cab. Sitting in the back seat, staring out at the blurred streetlights of downtown Austin, my phone began to vibrate violently against my thigh. It was not a phone call. It was a rapid succession of silent push notifications from my custom home security network. Alert 1. Motion detected in the primary hallway. Alert 2. Unauthorized access attempt at the home office door. Alert 3. Primary biometric scanner bypassed. My pulse hammered aggressively against my eardrums. I instructed the driver to step on the gas, handing him a $50 bill from my purse to ensure he did not ask any unnecessary questions. We tore through the empty streets, but by the time we pulled up to my upscale apartment complex, the situation had already escalated far beyond a simple security alert. The quiet, tree-lined street was entirely illuminated by the frantic flashing of red and blue emergency lights. 3 patrol cars were parked haphazardly across the entrance, and yellow police tape was already being strung across the main lobby doors. Residents were gathered in small groups on the sidewalk, whispering and pointing. I pushed past the growing crowd, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. My mind was razor-sharp, shifting instantly from the role of a polite daughter into a highly defensive, analytical state. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a rumpled suit stepped into my path, holding up a hand to stop me. It was Detective Miller. I knew him from a previous corporate security consultation my firm had conducted with the local precinct 2 years ago. "Ms. Fernandez," he said, his voice grave and strictly professional, "we received an automated distress signal from your secondary server grid about 20 minutes ago. I am sorry to tell you this, but your unit has been compromised." "Who was it?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely devoid of panic. "We do not know yet," Miller replied, lifting the police tape for me to duck under. "The perpetrator was highly organized. They managed to scramble the hallway cameras and successfully brute force the digital keypad on your office door. However, it seems they were unaware of the fail-safe protocol you installed. The moment they tried to physically alter the mainframe, the silent alarms triggered, locking down the room and sending an immediate dispatch request to us. They panicked and ran before we arrived." I followed him up the elevator, my chest tight. When we stepped into my apartment, the air smelled faintly of ozone and burnt wiring. I bypassed the living room entirely and walked straight down the hall to my private workspace. The heavy reinforced door had been forced open, the electronic lock completely fried and hanging by a single wire. Inside, the room was a chaotic mess. But my trained eyes immediately noticed what was untouched: my expensive laptops, the high-end monitors, and the petty cash drawer were all perfectly intact. The intruder had not come for money or easily fenced electronics. They had gone straight for the heavy steel safe bolted beneath my custom oak desk. The metal door of the safe was scratched and dented, bearing the marks of a frantic, desperate attempt to pry it open. Inside that safe rested a specialized external hard drive. It contained the complete, unencrypted source code for a revolutionary artificial intelligence algorithm I had spent the last 3 years developing. It was a proprietary asset worth tens of millions of dollars. Whoever broke in tonight knew exactly what it was, where it was hidden, and how much it was worth. "Crime scene investigators are on their way to dust for prints," Miller said, shining his heavy flashlight over the damaged safe. "But we did find something the suspect left behind in their rush to escape." He gestured toward a clear plastic evidence bag resting on my glass coffee table. Inside the bag was a cheap, black disposable cell phone, a burner device. The screen was still brightly illuminated, glowing ominously in the dim light of the room. "It was dropped near the fire exit," the detective explained, crossing his arms over his chest. "Looks like they were trying to send an update to their employer right as the alarm blared, but they dropped the device before hitting send. We will need to log it into evidence, but I thought you should see it first." I stepped closer, staring down through the plastic. The unsent text message was displayed clearly in plain text, directed to a blocked, anonymous number. I could not get it. The system automatically locked. The words burned into my retinas. I recognized that exact phrasing. I recognized the cowardly, frantic tone. My mind flashed back to the dining room exactly an hour and a half ago. Matteo returning to the table, his face devoid of color, his hands shaking as he aggressively shoved his phone into his pocket. My mother masking her sheer panic with a loud, fake laugh. I stood frozen in the center of my violated sanctuary. A cold, heavy silence descended upon me, drowning out the crackle of the police radios and the murmur of the officers in the hallway. I did not shed a single tear. I did not gasp in shock. The final sliver of familial loyalty within me simply snapped, replaced by an icy, calculated rage. The people who wanted to destroy my life, steal my life's work, and sell my future to the highest bidder did not wear ski masks or hide in dark alleyways. They shared my last name, and they had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. As the crime scene investigators packed up their kits and the final police officer walked out of my apartment, the silence that settled over the room was absolute. I stood alone in the center of my shattered workspace, staring at the dented metal safe beneath my desk. The police expected me to feel violated, terrified, or crushed by the realization that someone had targeted my home. Instead, I felt an intense, calculating calm wash over me. To understand how I arrived at this exact moment of chilling clarity, you have to understand the ruthless environment I operate in every single day. I hold the position of lead systems architect at Nexia Core Solutions, a global technology conglomerate specializing in predictive modeling. Over the past 4 years, I successfully engineered, compiled, and patented an autonomous learning algorithm capable of predicting volatile financial market fluctuations with a staggering 92% accuracy rate. We are talking about highly classified intellectual property valued at over $50 million. When you possess an asset of that immense magnitude, paranoia is no longer a personality flaw. It is a fundamental survival requirement. Exactly 5 months prior, I began detecting microscopic anomalies within my digital perimeter. They were incredibly subtle. A competitor would mysteriously adjust their development timelines to perfectly match my unreleased milestones. An anonymous, encrypted server pinged my corporate firewall at 3 o'clock in the morning, testing for vulnerabilities. Someone was bleeding my internal data to a rival tech firm, but they were doing it clumsily. They were desperately searching for the master key, the final unencrypted source code. which I kept entirely offline. I initially suspected a corporate mole. I ran silent internal audits on my colleagues, expecting to find a disgruntled developer. Instead, my private investigation revealed a sickening pattern of physical proximity. The data breaches always coincided with family visits. Suddenly, the bizarre shift in my family dynamics made perfect sense. My mother, who had spent my entire adult life dismissing my career as tedious computer jargon, suddenly developed an insatiable curiosity about my data security. She would casually pour a glass of wine in my kitchen and ask if a power grid failure could wipe out my backups. She feigned maternal pride, asking if my apartment security was truly strong enough to protect such valuable work. Matteo, a man who could barely comprehend how to reset his own email password without assistance, suddenly started asking pointed questions about remote server access and physical firewall bypasses. I am not a victim by nature. When I realized the predators circling my life were the very people who raised me, I did not confront them with my suspicions. Confrontation allows the enemy to adapt and change their strategy. Instead, I built a slaughterhouse and painted it to look like a sanctuary. The heavy steel safe bolted beneath my oak desk was nothing more than an elaborate piece of theater. The drive locked inside of it was completely devoid of my actual life's work. My genuine encrypted source code is permanently vaulted inside a heavily guarded, biometric subterranean server bank at Nexia Core Solutions. The external drive sitting in my damaged apartment safe was a decoy, a digital honeypot designed specifically for a rat. I had spent 3 weeks meticulously custom coding a highly aggressive, self-executing tracking virus, disguising its outer shell to look exactly like my core algorithmic files. If a thief managed to steal that drive and plug it into any computer network, the virus would instantly embed itself deep into their motherboard. It was designed to silently bypass standard firewalls, activate the device camera, scrape every single financial record, banking application, and encrypted message on the host device, and beam the entire package directly to a secure, untraceable cloud server I monitored. Most importantly, if the thief attempted to copy or transfer the files, the virus would trigger a catastrophic localized wipe, completely destroying their operating system and locking them out permanently. Now, staring at the abandoned burner phone resting on my glass coffee table, the grand design of their betrayal crystallized into a horrifyingly clear picture. The instruction my mother had whispered earlier that evening was not merely a command to break a physical lock and grab a piece of hardware. It was a direct order from Matteo to breach my localized network and fundamentally change my master access codes. They intended to lock me out of my own customized security system entirely, essentially holding my digitized life hostage. They planned to hand over the stolen algorithm to a rival firm for a massive, untraceable payout. The motive was the oldest, most pathetic reason in human history: cold, hard cash. I had recently uncovered, through a discreet private investigator, that Matteo was drowning in a massive underground gambling syndicate. He owed roughly $800,000 to incredibly dangerous men who did not negotiate or send polite collection letters. My mother, entirely incapable of letting her golden boy face the consequences of his own disastrous choices, had made a calculated decision. She decided that my life's work, my sleepless nights, and my entire future were the perfect currency to pay off his massive debts and secure her own luxurious lifestyle. They were more than willing to burn my career and my reputation to the ground to save a son who had never worked a single hard day in his life. But my mother and brother made one catastrophic miscalculation. They assumed I was just a naive, obedient daughter playing on a computer in her room. They did not realize they had just stepped into a trap set by an apex predator, and the steel jaws were already snapping shut. At exactly 8 o'clock the following morning, my phone shattered the heavy silence of the apartment. Detective Miller's voice on the other end was clipped and strictly business, a stark contrast to the emotional wreckage I was sitting in. "We ran the serial numbers on that burner device, Miss Fernandez," he stated flatly. "It was purchased at a convenience store on the east side 2 days ago. The buyer used a prepaid corporate credit card registered to a limited liability company out of Delaware. a shell company. The local precinct does not have the resources to crack interstate corporate veils quickly, but we are filing the subpoenas today. I thanked him and ended the call. I did not need the sluggish bureaucracy of the local police department to hand me the name of that shell company. I already possessed it. Before fleeing the scene in a blind panic last night, my brother had made a fatal, amateur error. In his desperate, sweating attempt to bypass my secondary firewall before the physical lockdown, Mateo had plugged a rogue flash drive directly into my localized network port. He hoped to manually overwrite the security protocols and force the safe open. He failed. But the moment that foreign hardware connected to my ecosystem, my custom tracking virus latched onto it like a digital parasite. When Mateo ran back to the safety of his own home and inevitably plugged that same flash drive into his personal laptop to assess what went wrong, the virus executed flawlessly. By 9:30 in the morning, my secure cloud server began receiving massive, encrypted data packets. I sat bathed in the cold, blue light of my monitors, sipping bitter black coffee as I meticulously combed through the digital wreckage of my family's carefully guarded secrets. The virus had scraped everything: emails, encrypted chat logs, hidden hard drive partitions, and cached financial documents. The shell company was not merely a temporary front established to buy a disposable phone. It was a massive, highly sophisticated money laundering operation that had been running for over 4 years. And the most sickening revelation of all was the name stamped across the digital incorporation documents. It was not Mateo. It was Isabella Fernandez. The bank statements painted a picture of absolute, unadulterated greed. My mother was not just a desperate woman trying to cover her son's gambling debts out of blind maternal love. She was the architect of her own financial ruin. The ledgers revealed years of offshore transfers, hidden assets, and severe financial hemorrhaging. Her lavish lifestyle, the custom designer dresses, the expensive imported wines, and the elite country club memberships were all built on a crumbling mountain of debt. She was currently over $2 million in the red. She was planning to steal and sell my proprietary algorithm for tens of millions, clear Mateo's underground mess as a convenient side effect, and pocket the vast majority of the untraceable cash to maintain her own hollow, aristocratic empire. I was nothing but a sacrificial lamb on the altar of her vanity. I turned off the monitors. The office plunged into shadows. For 2 grueling hours, I sat completely still in the center of the room, staring at the blank screens. I experienced a violent, agonizing psychological war within my own mind. This was the precipice of no return. On one side of the chasm was the deeply ingrained biological instinct to protect my own blood. It was the societal conditioning that insists family is sacred, a bond you do not break, no matter how toxic the poison they feed you. On the other side was a cold, unyielding demand for absolute justice. They had not just tried to rob me, they had fundamentally tried to erase my existence, steal my life's work, and destroy my reputation, all to sustain their own pathetic, fragile illusions. The war ended. Justice won. I compiled the offshore bank statements, the shell company registration documents, the digital footprint of the attempted data breach, and the localized tracking coordinates from Mateo's infected laptop. I placed every single damning file into a highly encrypted digital dossier. I addressed the secure email directly to the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, copying my corporate legal team at Nexia Core Solutions. I took one deep breath, holding it in my lungs for 5 long seconds, and I pressed send. The digital pigeon flew. The damage was now permanent. There was no taking it back. The gears of federal law enforcement were officially in motion. I picked up my phone and opened my text messages. I navigated to my mother's contact name. I did not call her. I did not want to hear the manipulative honey in her voice. I typed 3 simple, absolute sentences. Come to my house right now. Come alone. The game is over. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room. Outside, the bright Texas morning sun had been entirely swallowed by a bruised, yellowish-brown sky. A massive dust storm was rapidly rolling in from the western plains, choking the city of Austin in a blinding, suffocating wall of grit and howling wind. The temperature was dropping fast, rattling the heavy glass panes. It was a violent, unforgiving force of nature, perfectly mirroring the absolute destruction I was about to unleash inside these four walls. The heavy brass knocker on my front door echoed through the silent apartment, completely cutting through the muffled howling of the dust storm battering the exterior walls of the building. I did not rush. I walked slowly across the hardwood floor, my bare feet completely silent, and unlocked the deadbolt. My mother stood in the hallway, despite the apocalyptic weather tearing through the city of Austin outside. Isabella Fernandez looked as though she had just stepped out of a high-end fashion magazine spread. Her dark hair was immaculately styled. Her beige trench coat was perfectly pressed, and her posture was as rigid and demanding as a monarch inspecting her subjects. She stepped over my threshold without waiting for an invitation, bringing the faint, expensive scent of her designer perfume into my living space. She turned to face me, her features instantly molding into a mask of deep, wounded maternal concern. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times before, a psychological weapon she had honed over 3 decades to keep my father and brother perfectly in line. "Haley, darling," she began, her voice dripping with artificial warmth as she unbuttoned her coat. "What on earth is going on? Your text message was incredibly dramatic. And Detective Miller actually called your father this morning asking about a break-in. You have the entire family terrified. We have been worried sick about you all night long." I stood perfectly still, my arms crossed over my chest, watching her perform. I did not offer her a seat. I did not offer her a drink. I just stared, letting the silence stretch until it became a suffocating weight in the room. Her perfect smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before she smoothly transitioned into her next tactic, the righteous protector. "All right, I know what this is about." Isabella sighed heavily, waving her manicured hand in the air as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "Mateo told me everything. He told me about the little misunderstanding at your apartment last night. Haley, you have to listen to me. You are so naive when it comes to the corporate world. I found out that Nexia Core Solutions was planning to exploit you. They were going to take your algorithm, lock you out of your own patents, and leave you with absolutely nothing. I was terrified for your future." She took a step closer, reaching out as if she wanted to hold my hands. I stepped back, and her hands fell awkwardly to her sides. "I told Mateo to go to your apartment and secure a backup of your files," she continued, her voice rising in a desperate attempt to sound convincing. "That is all it was, darling, a backup. We were trying to protect your assets so you could start your own independent firm. But Mateo, bless his heart, is so clumsy with technology. He panicked when that ridiculous alarm went off. Now, you have blown this entirely out of proportion by involving the authorities. I need you to pick up your phone right now. Call Detective Miller and tell him you made a mistake. Tell him you found the missing items and you are withdrawing the police report. We need to handle this privately, as a family." The sheer audacity of her lies hung in the air, thick and nauseating. She truly believed I was stupid enough to swallow this fabricated narrative. She believed her maternal authority was a magic wand that could wave away federal crimes. A low, bitter laugh escaped my throat. It was a harsh, scraping sound that seemed to startle her. I did not just laugh. I let out a deep, genuine chuckle of pure disbelief. "Protect my assets," I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Start my own independent firm." I turned my back on her and walked over to the kitchen island. Sitting precisely in the center of the dark marble counter was a thick manila folder. I had spent the last hour printing out the physical copies of the digital dossier I had sent to the authorities. I picked it up, walked back to the living room, and threw the folder violently onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a loud, authoritative smack that made Isabella physically flinch. "Open it," I commanded. Isabella stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. She hesitated, her eyes darting nervously between my face and the table. Slowly, she leaned down and flipped open the cardboard cover. Resting on top was a high-resolution printout of the corporate registration documents for the Delaware Shell Company. Right beneath it were the offshore banking statements, highlighted in bright yellow ink, showing exactly $2 million in negative balances, alongside a detailed ledger of the massive gambling debts my brother owed to an underground syndicate. I watched the color completely drain from her flawless face. The immaculate, composed matriarch vanished in the blink of an eye. Her jaw clenched so tightly I could hear her teeth grinding together. Her eyes widened, scanning the undeniable proof of her financial ruin and her criminal conspiracy. "You did not send Mateo to back up my files," I stated, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You sent him to steal my life's work. You were going to sell my algorithm to the highest bidder to cover your $2 million in debt and save your precious son from having his legs broken by loan sharks. You were going to let me take the fall, let me lose my career, let me face the corporate lawsuits from Nexia Corp, all so you could keep drinking expensive champagne and pretending you are royalty." The mask finally dropped. It did not just slip. It shattered into a million jagged pieces. The loving mother disappeared, replaced by a cornered, venomous predator. Isabella slammed the folder shut and stood up straight. Her face was flushed dark red with pure, unadulterated rage. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "How dare you speak to me that way?" she screamed, her voice cracking with fury, entirely dropping the soft, aristocratic tone she always used. "You ungrateful, arrogant little wretch, I gave you your life, I fed you, I clothed you, I paid for those elite schools that made you so damn smart. Everything you have, everything you are, belongs to this family. You owe me." She took a menacing step toward me, her eyes wild. "I despise how smug you are," she hissed, spit flying from her lips. "Sitting in this expensive apartment, looking down on your father and your brother as if you are so much better than us. You care more about some stupid computer code than your own flesh and blood." Mateo was going to be killed. My reputation, the name I built for this family, was going to be dragged through the mud and destroyed by bankruptcy. Yes, I was going to take it. It was your duty to save us, but you are too selfish to ever care about anyone but yourself. The storm outside seemed to answer her rage, the wind slamming aggressively against the floor-to-ceiling windows, rattling the heavy glass, but inside, I felt nothing but an absolute, glacial calm. Her screaming did not intimidate me. It merely confirmed every dark suspicion I had ever harbored about her. I closed the distance between us. I did not yell. I did not raise my hands. I simply walked directly into her personal space, forcing her to look up into my eyes. I was taller than her now, and I used every inch of that physical advantage. I leaned down, bringing my face mere inches from her ear. "Did you honestly think I was stupid enough to leave my actual encrypted source code sitting in a cheap metal safe under a wooden desk?" I whispered, my voice as sharp and cold as a surgical scalpel. Isabella froze. The frantic rising and falling of her chest suddenly stopped. "I knew you were bleeding my data for months," I continued, speaking slowly so every single word would carve itself into her brain. "That external drive you sent Mateo to steal was a decoy. It was a digital trap, and I want to personally thank you for telling him to plug it into your network. The moment he connected that hardware, my tracking virus infiltrated your entire ecosystem. It bypassed your firewalls, scraped every single hidden banking ledger, and mapped the exact server architecture of your little shell company in Delaware." Isabella stumbled backward, her designer heel catching on the edge of the luxury rug. She grabbed the back of the sofa to steady herself, her eyes wide with a sudden, suffocating terror. "You gave them my data," she gasped, her voice barely a hollow whisper. "I gave them everything," I replied, staring her down with absolute authority. "I sent the entire compiled dossier to the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation at exactly 8 o'clock this morning, to ensure swift action. I also copied the ruthless corporate legal team at Nexia Core Solutions. The entire server grid of your shell company was locked down and seized by federal agents exactly 10 minutes ago. Your accounts are frozen. Your secrets are public." Isabella looked as though she had been physically struck by a speeding train. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The authoritarian control she had wielded over my life for 32 years had just been entirely eradicated. She was no longer a puppet master. She was just a broke, desperate criminal waiting for a pair of steel handcuffs. I turned away from her, walked to the front entrance, and grabbed the heavy brass handle. I threw the door wide open. The howling Texas wind instantly rushed into the apartment, swirling dust across the polished hardwood floors and tearing the carefully curated warmth right out of the room. I looked back at the woman who gave birth to me. She was trembling violently, clutching her designer coat against her chest, as if it could somehow protect her from the catastrophic reality she had created. "Get out of my house," I ordered, my voice carrying over the roaring wind outside. "Get out right now, before the federal vehicles turn onto this street and arrest you on my doorstep." By 7 o'clock the following morning, the local news networks were running the story on a continuous loop. The broadcast footage was jarring, yet undeniably satisfying to watch. There was my mother, her expensive designer trench coat draped awkwardly over her shoulders in a desperate attempt to hide the heavy steel handcuffs. She was being escorted out of her sprawling estate by stern federal agents, her perfect posture entirely broken. Mateo walked closely behind her. His head hung low, looking exactly like a terrified child rather than the arrogant golden boy he had always pretended to be. The official federal charges flashing across the bottom of the screen were staggering, including wire fraud, severe economic espionage, and massive financial laundering. My father, Diego, remained completely true to his cowardly nature. He did not stand by his wife of 34 years. Within 48 hours of the arrest, he had his legal team file emergency divorce papers in a frantic, pathetic attempt to shield whatever fragmented assets he still had left from the impending federal asset seizures. My personal phone rang incessantly for an entire week. Relatives I had not spoken to in over 5 years suddenly found my number, flooding my voicemail with tearful, demanding messages. They begged me to go to the police and drop the charges, crying that family is family. I permanently blocked every single one of their numbers. You cannot simply withdraw federal indictments, and even if the law allowed it, I would not change a single thing I did. At Nexia Core Solutions, the corporate atmosphere shifted entirely in my favor. I was not reprimanded or investigated for the security breach. Instead, I was celebrated. The board of directors held an emergency executive meeting and publicly commended my ruthless foresight. I had successfully protected a $50 million corporate asset without a single line of proprietary code ever being compromised. By the end of that same month, I was officially promoted to the Director of Advanced Systems Architecture. The new position came with a massive corner office and a salary increase that permanently solidified my complete financial independence. I did not need any family inheritance. I had built my own empire from the ground up. Coming back to my apartment now feels completely different. The suffocating, the heavy tension that used to constantly linger in the air is entirely gone. I spent a quiet Saturday afternoon taking down every single framed family photograph that used to decorate my long hallway. The forced smiles, the staged holiday perfection, and the hollow memories went straight into the trash bags. Now, the walls are beautifully clean. The only company I keep in this peaceful space is Buster, my golden retriever rescue, who happily rests his heavy head on my feet while I work at my desk. As the sun set that evening, I walked up to the heavy reinforced door of my home office. I manually reset the digital keypad to a brand new combination. I was no longer changing the code to keep out digital thieves or corporate spies. I was permanently locking out my toxic past. If there is one absolute truth you take away from my journey, let it be this: peace will never come from enduring the people who exploit you. Even if they share your exact same last name, you are not destroying a family by walking away. You are simply cleaning up your own life. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would absolutely love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from right now? Please let me know down in the comments. If you found today's episode compelling and you want to help support our channel, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you will find our absolute best, most intense true stories that are completely exclusive and simply too explicit for us to publish publicly on YouTube. You can easily join our community by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link located right in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your kindness, and always remember to stay strong.